Hi there, it's Mubali. And I've wanted to talk about a potential concept that I've been working on off and on for probably many years in different incarnations. And this is having to do with the ability to perform live, but not just in the traditional form or the form that is currently common, where there's a lot of audio playback. I still like to do that, and I want to have that always as an option in a performance, but I also have been working on attempting to have something where I can kind of jam out in a sense, where I have control over multiple aspects of the structure of a song, including like the sound design elements, when they play, what plays. I wanted to have the ability to play in synth lines whenever I felt so inclined, and have them contribute to the overall structure of a seemingly full sounding composition. And I've been working on this for quite a while, and I wanted to discuss in a few videos actually what I wanted to do, what I want to do with this, how I'm accomplishing most of these goals, where I am lacking in some departments, and potential ideas to fix them. And hopefully this serves as maybe an inspiration for people that are looking for methods of performing that are a little more adventurous, that allow you to have a little more free form flow in a sense over how a set would go, especially if you're playing for a few hours, like 2-3 hours. It's nice to be able to have this extra component in a performance where people get an experience that is quite unique, something that might not happen the same way again, or at least the probability of that situation and that performance happening the exact same way again in that circumstance is very small. So what I'm going to do for this first video is talk about what's going on in a few different areas of this performance. This first video is going to be focused on what's going on inside of Ableton Live, and how I've rigged up some really sometimes wild things to get what I wanted to do accomplished. I have to say that with the new additions to Live 10 and the more flexible routing, it's made putting this concept together a lot easier. Less program gymnastics have to be done, but there's still a lot of interesting trickery that I'm using, and all to accomplish this ideal concept of a performance where it's kind of a jam, but there's structure, or at least there can be structure, and you as the performer have the ability to express yourself in multiple ways, and to where you can have control or even the responsibility for creating many of the elements that go into a song, or at least sequencing them on the fly by triggering certain things or pressing certain keys that do certain things at certain times. So this is all helpful to give the audience who's there to dance the concept of feeling like, okay, this is new material, but it's still unformed. I know this is a little vague to start with, but as we go through it, I'll explain the aspects of it as we go along through, and we'll start with the live component, what's going on inside the program itself, and then we'll move on to the controller aspects, because I'm using multiple controllers. I am using one hardware synthesizer, the Novation X Station, and it's pretty helpful, but it doesn't have to be this particular synth. It just, an external sound source lowers the processing. Already I'm operating at a higher processor amount than I would personally prefer to. I'd really wish that this overhead was at least half of this. And there will be points like when we go through like the performance aspect of it, and me like showing you through through jamming how it should in theory work. There's probably going to be some points that glitch out. I have my my settings, my buffer settings turned all the way up, which you would think would be not very, it would be counterintuitive for live performance, especially if you're trying to play in synth lines. But I've rigged up a couple of sneaky tricks to help with that. So we'll get through it as we go along. I think the best thing to do is to start left to right. So this first channel, this is a very tricky sort of channel where it's got a lot of interesting things going on. Technically, there is no actual instrument in here. This is just routing MIDI primarily to this giant mega drum kit, which is going to be the workhorse of this primary workhorse, at least for the rhythm and structure of the pseudo impromptu compositions. So these have kick patterns and sequences where I've set up basically mini arrangements of what would be the kick and rhythm sections of a track. And some of these have different, I've got loops that are being triggered on and off. Then I've got like my basic vanilla percussion, very, very boring stuff. It's really, it's meant not to be the most super creative in the drum department on those particular things, but that's because the focus is primarily oriented towards these extra percussion hits and these other hits that I can either play in real time, or I also have a Max for Live device that I've rigged up to do some random pattern generation for these hits, which frees up more free time for the actual arrangement of the sounds and playing in leads and creating the bed of atmospherics and wild and crazy stuff. But this generally has structures. So it's got the kick, and it's playing the kick, and when the kick stops, the bass has been taught to also stop by some interesting routing, which I will show you now. So this is sending the MIDI controller signal number 56. And I have that being mapped using this Max for Live device that's called a manual MIDI mapper, which is incredibly, incredibly handy. And it's being routed to the gain on the bass instrument itself. So whenever the volume, whenever the 56 control CC is at full, it's going to drop the volume on that bass instrument completely. Very handy to feel like the traditional stops and starts that are in my normal composition. Makes it not feel as loopy, which is what I'm trying to aim for. I also have some transition effects that are automated in. These ones are automated in, so it'll be a little bit more smooth. I have another set of transition effects that are on like the Submaster for everything that I can use for more real-time glitching out and just processing the whole mix entirely. So I've got several of these, about 8 of these general structures, which probably will be about an hour if you played all of them Then I've got these little mini structures that I'm using follow actions to rotate between. They'll do their thing and then they'll go to something else. So I have this constant these grooves are recycling, but in the the MIDI itself, I have these things called bass change and kit switch, which change the drum kit and the patch on the bass synth. So I've made a few, probably like 10 or 11 different bass patches using a lightweight software synth, massive in this case, and it creates some interesting timbres. And because this is randomly changing the patch, I don't exactly know what I'm going to get. So it's always, even though the structure is relatively similar, the drum kit themselves will sound different, and the actual actually I'm going to put this in here because I also have something to switch the different drum loops that I'm using. So that'll allow me to have a different set of grooves to choose, drum grooves, or loops rather, to choose from in, we'll do that, that's pretty easy. And so that'll create a feeling somewhat of being different, even though the overall underlying structure is generally the same. So that's something I would do for like not necessarily emergency, but just to like experiment out for like a good half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that, if I have an extended performance. And then it's got a couple of interesting things, so there will be at least a couple of things that stand out. Also, you'll notice down here that there are program changes, so I can also, this is being routed directly to the bass instrument itself. So I can also specify which bass instrument I want for each segment. And I've got a few of those where I wanted specific bass notes for the specific grooves, or specific semi-compositions, more or less, because you can treat these as like almost like they're songs along those lines. And then scroll all the way down the bottom. Here's the sneaky stuff. I've got this nice little transition thing that's going to do a little like effect, like it's going to be like a low pass filter sweep thing to like set up this algorithmic style set of where it's just kicks. And there are different kick patterns, and I'm using follow actions to cycle between, basically generating a lot of variation. And this one has a complete muting, so it'll mute the bass instrument as well to feel like a little drop, a little gap, you know, which is traditional with the style that I like to arrange by. So this stuff is more or less what provides a semblance of structure and organization and form to each composition. This will allow me to not let it feel super loopy, and when each of these are done, when each of these compositions are done, I am using Isotonic Studio's follow clip to transition all the way down to this transition 16 bar like roll, where it's just 16 bar low pass filter sweep, and then it goes to the algorithmic kicks seamlessly. So it works. It seems to work pretty well. So that's the overall driving mechanical backbone of it. There's definitely different sets of structures in here that have more or less drums, which means that I need to either fill them by playing them in somehow, which I've rigged up when we get to the controls, and actually as we get later on, there's a few tricks that I've set up to at least do all the basics to where we get the boom chick whenever we need it, and then I can experiment from there, or experiment on top of it. So that's his first channel, and it's got some interesting. The other thing that's really interesting, that's new, is it's got this Max for Live device called the input selection, where I'm actually routing the sum of the kick and bass group into the channel, so I can then put effects on it like this. That way, it can all be organized and structured and automated in the clip automation without having to group any channels unnecessarily or anything like that. So it makes it very handy, and I definitely, all these, the isotonic stuff is paid, but the manual MIDI mapper is free. This input selection is free as well. You just go to maxforlive.com. This is where I scour that place almost daily, but generally weekly, looking for interesting new things to incorporate into this monstrosity that I'm putting together. So this channel is funny. It's my bass note channel, and it doesn't have anything on it. It's just a MIDI channel with a single clip on here. Now, this makes sense. This will make the most sense when we get to the controller aspect of the explanation. But this one clip is going to be responsible for all the bass lines that are going to be played, or at least all the bass line patterns. It's being set up right. It's set up to be controlled by my launch pad, where I can just basically, it runs like a step sequencer, so I can just kind of sequence the notes in and do that on the fly. And I opted for that instead of having like set patterns, baseline patterns that change, because I just really wanted control over. That puts more, in some sense, pressure and responsibility on me to not slack off too much, and always remember, after a little while, you should probably change up the bass groove a little bit and like do some fun stuff with the bass, and don't sit there and just noodle around with synth stuff all the time. You got to change the groove. The only thing that I'm considering is the placement that I have in the overall set as far as this spatial dynamic here, because really it's just more of a mouthpiece to the controller. It's being controlled externally, and I have visual feedback that I can access at any point in time. Right now it's only serving to have my reminders of what everything does, how I have things mapped on my controller, as well as a handy checklist, which is a little messed up looking right now, but whatever. Of just things to do preset, just to make sure everything works properly. Because some of the stuff in Max for Live means well, and it'll do what you want it to do most of the time, but sometimes it might forget its settings, and you might have to reset them. So I got tired of having to remember where things were set at just in case, so I put together a checklist for that. So yeah, so the bass instrument, that's the bass notes, is just note information, and like it's a large pattern that has like certain elements of it that are looped, and I can change which are looped, and then change the notes that are in there and all that as I like. Now we come to this monstrosity. This started out as a drum kit that I never needed to add. I never needed to start with a new drum kit. I would just keep adding to it and then just change the kit as I went along to have a lot of variety of drums. I think I have something like, how many kits do I have? 14 different kits right now. There will probably be more, but this makes the set larger and larger and larger by doing this. But I'd rather do it this method than have it like load another drum kit itself, because it also is important for me to be able to have this kit not nested in a group of kits as it works with my control surface, where I can see each of these individual cells is represented as a square on my launch pad. So I can actually just trigger these things when I want to. I can jam in the anything that I want to do and also record it in, or I can also step sequence it in, because the same step sequencer situation works for any particular channel, any clip that has an instrument. You can step sequence using this control surface for the launch pad. So yeah, I've got 14 different kits, and I've got a nice little. This thing is called. Basically it takes note input or gate input basically, and will randomize a parameter of your choosing for you. So I've got it to randomize the kit. So each time I press that, it's going to present a different kit. So that kind of helps. Closed hat, open hat, snares. These are all audio samples just to save on processing. And these are rigged up in chains, and the chain selector, all the chain selectors are sent to one chain selector, and that's what's being automated by the kit switch. Down at the bottom, this is actually where the kick and bass instruments live. The kick instrument is just a sample, which I'll probably put more samples in there in the future. Right now I'm just only rocking one, but I'll probably put more in there as it goes along. There's some general processing on here. I'm trying not to do too much third-party plug-in processing to minimize the general overhead, and I'm trying to pre-process things if I relatively need to. It's really difficult to put together like a live thing and have it sound close to as loud as your own mastered work. So it's this has always been a challenge that I'm dealing with, which is still probably not out of the woods yet. But the MIDI from the kick patterns go into here, and they're being played. And I had originally some sort of algorithmic kick device, which I thought was kind of cool, but I figured I would save processing and do it like this because I have more structural control over the song this way. And then the bass instrument is massive, and I've got several patches going to it. This Max for Live device here I got for free from, I think, Ableton Curse was the person who did this. I'll check in the future and see. But this allows me to, if any of the notes in this come in, it'll toggle on any sampler that is occupying those spaces. So that allows me to like loop, or it just allows me to set off these drum loops and they'll continue to loop. And because they're in Ableton samplers, which I have different. Oh, these are simplers. Okay, so they're using the basic like simpler. I'm using simpler, so it'll do the classic mode and it'll engage the loop. And because the warp is engaged for all of them, all the drum loops will be in time, which is very, very handy in this particular situation. Which also allows me to sequence when those loops come in and when they come out, because this device takes. So you hit that note to turn it on, hit it to turn it off. So it definitely makes it easier to deal with in a lot of respects. So yes, so we've got the loops that are being triggered, the bass instrument, which is also getting program change information from the kick pattern, and it's got a couple of other nifty things going on with it. I can do a pitch shift on it whenever I feel the need to like just change it a little bit. And not super crazy, not super heavily processed. I'm really relying on the sound of Massive for the most part. So we've got all those loops, then we come up here, and then this is where the bass instrument change is going to happen, which is using the same, oh, this is actually using a program change from this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful alum and friend of friend. And he does these really interesting stuff with randomization and probability. And so he's got this thing that's very similar to a John Cage technique where he's using the I Ching to generate numerical data between, and I've modified it to choose a certain number that is that the range is narrowed to, but I'm basically using the I Ching and probability to change the bass instrument, which is fun. And this Kaizen, Jeff Kaiser, just got some really interesting stuff. A lot of it free. He just recently put out a paid device that is pretty interesting. I haven't gotten it yet because funds are tight, but it's very, very interesting stuff. So I love probability, I love randomization, I love the uncontrollability and adapting with that uncontrolled aspect of things. Makes it really fun. So whenever that bass change gets a note, it's gonna trigger, it's gonna throw the coins and select one between 1 and 15 because I have 15 different bass patches. And of course a crash cymbal, which is important. Now up here, this is a randomization for the different loops, the selection of different loops, just like the chains. These are audio samples that are randomized, that are just little uplifters. I was really lazy and I just grabbed some audio from sample packs because you can do that too. I can't. Sometimes you don't have time to make every single thing, and so these are just nice little transition things to make it feel like there's it's not just looping that's going on or anything that's loopy that's going on, and there's actually like movement that's happening. And builds anticipation, makes everybody excited for whatever's going on. Breakbeat loops, percussion loops, top loops, which can include like stuff like that, and then glitchy sounding loops along those lines. So yeah, so we also have this grids. Now this is a take on a Mutable Instruments Eurorack device, and I've got it sent to a whole bunch of randomizers that basically randomize what am I doing here? The different parameters of this device. And what Grids does is it basically has a database of, I would say, breakbeats and rhythms and sort of that, and you can kind of cycle through them and it will kind of generate those rhythms. So I use those for the not to create breakbeats particularly, but even though I probably might rig up another set of those just to have like an ability to do a little breakbeat thing without having to write in a breakbeat. But this is meant to, using a couple of different methods to hit all 6 of these. So basically, the the individual hits from each of those drum patterns from grids will come in and play with these guys. So, yes. So this is doing a majority. This controls all the rhythmic aspects of the song, of the performance, and this is really a lot of the brains behind it. I'm using a lot. The active playing surface is only here what I will be usually engaging with. Although I do have access to put stuff all the way up here and access it with my launch pad, but because I can't fully coordinate it, color coordinate it, so it's really easy without having to look or having to move my mouse, then this is just fine because I know exactly what it is and where it is, and easy to see, especially when I show you the control surface setup. And so that's what's going on for the rhythm section and the overall structural components. The tick patterns and sequences only affect this. From here on in, I have to be responsible for this stuff, but I do have help. First thing is I have my Novation X station, and this is the most basic thing. It's really just, I've got MIDI routed. I'm routing the keyboard through live back into it, and just simple. Really, it's all about the sound design in the synth itself and the patches that I've made, because I have quite a few different patches that I've made that I can use, and it's really just to generate. I need stuff to make sounds. I mean, I've got all my rhythm stuff taken care of, and so I need to make sounds, and I also need to do that with as minimal processing overhead as possible. So so hardware synth is a good way to go for that. But any sort of external sound source is excellent for situations like that. But the fact that I can change patches and have a nice variety of different sounds I can do makes this very, very handy. Same thing when it goes to a software synth. I'm using Massive, and I have different program changes where I can. They're not automated, but I have them set it to one of my MIDI controllers, so I can change the sound at any point in time that I wish to. And then I have macro control over like 8 macros for Massive. And I'm using Massive primarily because it's just low processor. It's really cheap and light on the processor for most of the patches that I'm making, and I was trying other synths. The other thing is it actually responds perfectly to program changes. I've tried a few other synths where it's just a little trickier to get the program change to happen, or if the program change happens, there's a little dropout in the sound right during the program change, whether the patch is playing or not, and I don't like that. So this has been smooth. So it's really easy. This is all stuff meant to be played in real time. So no bells or whistles going to it directly, although we'll get to that, the extra little bit of fun stuff that goes into that in just a little bit. Now this is the sonic workhorse kind of the set. I have this thing it's called trigger sounds because they are meant to be triggered from my launch pad. It's very similar to the way that a traditional drum rack works, or how the drum rack works with my launch pad. So I can see these individual cells, and each individual cell allows me to do something. Now, this is staccato leads. The staccato leads is set up to go through an arpeggiator that's also sent to one of my favorite things, which is a probability gate. Basically, it'll get a note information, and it might go through, it might not go through. And also, if it goes through, it might turn off when you let go, it might not. So that combined with the arpeggiator, you can get these nice varying patterns that also vary between longer notes and shorter notes. But always, it's only going to be like a long note until the next, like maybe 16th note, or at least multiple of a 16th note increment. So easy. And then this goes to a few different synth. They're actually, all of these are basically just waveforms that I'm running through filters primarily. And yeah, this is just all like, oh no, there's a wavetable. There's a couple of stuff in here, but I'm trying to be relatively economical in processing. I'm not doing too much heavy stuff. This wavetable is great, but I can't run too many of them, and they're a little bit difficult. Well, I guess I am running quite a few of them. I'm running like 4 of them, but yeah. So, and I've got the ability to select which one is going on, and those are for the staccato lead, in which, okay, so that's the staccato leads. Now there's the play me leaders, which this still needs more work because I kind of need to rig up a few more patches for it. But I also have this sent to a control on my MIDI controller, and this is pretty simply put, play me leads. So I'm just playing this from, just playing it from my launch pad. Now over here, this is randomization for my master effects. So I call it Klitsch after a term Tom Cosm used, because he's the one who turned me on to this idea, where it's just basically a whole bunch of different effects that you can cycle through. And so this one just allows me to randomly select which one of those effects is going to happen when I decide to do do my transition effect thing. Now these 4 up here, this is fun. This is actually very interesting stuff. These four cells here heavily rely on this channel here, this audio backing channel here, which I will unfold and show you. I wanted something very similar to how I've seen some professional, some legendary psychedelic trance producers perform live, where they're muting and unmuting sounds for a particular song. Shout out to Merv, because he's the man, Eat Static. He was very much an inspiration for how I started going about this. I wanted to figure out another methodology of doing this, because I didn't necessarily want to recreate any of my old songs in this matter, but more along the lines of using this as a perpetual soundboard, where there's always these different sounds that have the potential to be included into what's going on, but you don't have to, they're not heard until you actually need them. And as opposed, muting and unmuting would be okay for certain situations, but I wanted something a little bit different. So I chose to do MIDI gating and to use a MIDI gator instead. So the all those channels individually are being routed using that input selector again. Once again, it's being routed. Are they being routed post? I guess they're being routed post mixer. Okay. Which I guess, oh yeah, it's fine because everything's controlled by the group, and the group audio is being muted. So yeah, we're sending the audio out of the channel into here, and then it's got a mitigator on it. So if I press this button to turn it on, or basically let it through, whatever's playing is going to go through, which means that I can put whatever type of ridiculous nonsense sound-wise I want in here. I have, as you can tell, like a crap load of synth lines and like other audio and just, weird shit. I also have a channel of what I like to call granular fodder, because I've got a granular effect processor on here from Isotonic as well, called Samsara, I believe. Oh no, I'm sorry. I was using Samsara, but then I changed it up because I actually felt that this one was a little bit better for my purposes. So the Hourglass granulator, and I can record it's like got a 10-second buffer that I've set to. So anything within the past 10 seconds, I will go through here, and I can use the mitigator as well to like let it through and play it mangled. I can also do a grain freeze on it to where I can just hold that part and mess around with that. I also got a little chopper in there to like chop the whatever's coming through, and I've got a control to actually bypass the granular effect completely. So these are audiobooks, really, just like clips from audiobooks that I have currently, and it's just interesting stuff to say. I think in the future, if I get a microphone, I might either rig up my own voice talking random things, or just talking about different stuff in here, or something a little more esoteric where I'll have like a computer generated voice thing that's reading important documents, or like explaining mathematical concepts. I think I would want to read a physics textbook and be able to like use that, just things that you won't encounter. It's all about having fun and expressing yourself in experimentation. So, it's all fun. And this is incoming audio for my iPhone, which is running a program called TC11, which is a nice touchscreen thing. I'll show you guys. I've used it on my iPad many, many times, but this time I'm using it on the iPhone, so I can use my iPad to run touchable, have better, even more control over the set, and also it just makes things a lot So yeah, so these things, which we'll just play some. Actually, what I do is, since they're all grouped together, I just do that, and they're using different follow actions. They're all changing at different times, so there's always variety going through. And so I can just lecture 11. One of the things I'm still working on is setting up a more functional way to change the vocal stuff. And I'm still experimenting with a couple of different concepts. It's on the to-do list. But for the most part, that covers a majority of what's going on in most of this set for that. Now, here's an interesting channel. This is called Hooks. And what does it do? It just plays hooks, basically. I have this is something I got from Isotonic Studios, this thing called Melody Sauce, which is, they advertise it as being an excellent way to generate melodic lead content for electronic dance music based ideas. And I kind of have to agree. It makes some pretty good hooks. And I just generate a whole bunch of them and use the follow to have each one play about 8 times or so, and then switch to something else whenever I want to set it off. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this down here because I do want to have one free, just the first clip to be blank. And this is a way to route these synth lines. I had rigged up a couple more synths that I'm still on the fence of whether I'm going to do them or not. One I don't really think I'm going to do just because it doesn't really flow very smoothly in this particular setup. So this is probably going to be taken out and maybe replaced with something else. And the alter ego is kind of funny, just to have like some cheesy vocalish type, like where I can maybe sing about peace and love and super hippie stuff like that without having to do so in my own voice. But it wasn't seeming to work out as well as I wanted it to just yet. But this allows these the MIDI from these parts to go to any of these synth parts that I'm able to play. And so basically I'm responsible for playing 4 synthesizer type instruments, and then basically mitigating another 4 different things as well as playing in the bass instrument and setting off which sequences are going to happen, changing what synth lines or what patches will be playing on certain things. It's fun. This is something that is very interesting. I'm really enjoying the possibilities that I have now with this. Now this 8th channel is a looper, because I have it set up to where all the synth stuff that I can play, either it can take this hooks part or I can jam stuff in. And if I really want to keep layers and do sound on sound style looping for just the synth lines, mind you, I don't do this with the drums or the kick and bass or anything like that. It's just the synth lines. I can do that, and so I've got sound on sound looping that's controlled with my MIDI controller. I'm using a launch control for this primary focus. Oh wait, no, for this one actually it's the Fader Fox, the SC4. One of the scenes on the Fader Fox SC4, I'm using the push buttons for that, and that controls the looper and who sends what where. I can disable all those sends because I don't need them. If it decides to actually behave. Okay. So, yeah. So, this looper also has this has a third-party effect, a Ubic G, just to do some granular stuff. For me, it's really easy. It's only like 2 parameters, so I can like quickly select it while I've got the loop stuff going, and then like mangle it. And it's a good way to like go into a transition or something like that, perhaps, and just get it to sound a little strange while you've got other stuff that's going on that could either add on to the looper itself, or you're just playing other stuff on top of it, so that when you kill the looper and clear it out, it feels like you've gone to something else, but there's still movement going on because you're still playing and you're still maintaining focus. So that's the main aspect of what's happening. Now, there's definitely stuff behind the scenes. I've got a whole bunch of crazy MIDI routing and stuff that's going on, and extra routing that's happening. I have, for instance, this is where all the routing for the hooks are going, because they get routed through here, they get sent to the individual channels. This is where the massive program changing is going. This is also where I have my, what I call vanilla patterns, where I have just, the basic, super simple, boom chick, easy pattern stuff that I've got set up to be controlled by a MIDI controller, by my launch control. So whenever I press one of the 5 buttons that are responsible, this will send this pattern into the drum kit just automatically. Like, I don't have to enable it to receive it or anything like that. It just goes. So that allows me to have easy control over making movement happen rather quickly. And then the last things that make this very, very important in my super secret weapon, this device called MIDI Quantize. This takes your incoming MIDI notes, and it's going to quantize it to the nearest interval that you've set it to. I'm choosing 16 because I'm lazy, and I can't play worth a damn, not on time, not at 150 plus BPM. I can't play 100 millisecond rapidly things. So this helps me. The key to it is playing a little bit ahead. So you just play a little bit ahead of the beat and then you're on time. So I use that to play in all the stuff that I need to play in. And I've got 2 of them. One for my master keyboard type situation, which is actually the Novation launch pad, because I have it's 64 grid, so I can do a lot more stuff, and the views change depending on what type of channel that I'm on. If I'm in an instrument channel, it'll look like a keyboard, but if I'm using a drum rack, it'll show the individual cells that are lined up or that are enabled. And then I've got another one that's just for the X station, and it bypasses everything for the bypasses the channel for the X station. So it's really like instant gratification, but always quantized. So I don't have to. It's basically allowing myself to play 2 things at once. I can play something like I could play on massive with the launch pad in one hand, but in the other hand I can be playing the X station as well, which I find to be very handy, and maybe a little Keith Emerson a little bit perhaps, but I like being able to play 2 things at once if I can. 2 different things at once. So that's pretty much how this is all set up. And then we have this full tracks here, in a situation where I would be going to perform somewhere, I would have my full tracks, and they will probably, let me unfold them. It's just 2 channels, and I would put them probably in the beginning, I would shift everything over like this. So yeah, by shifting all that stuff over, whenever it decides to behave. So it does change things a bit, and I would ungroup this just because I don't need that extra channel at that point. So yeah, so then I've got, full tracks to play to. And I've got low cuts on, or the ability to like, do bass kills at least. And the volume is controlled by Fader Fox SC4, or UC4, sorry. And so yeah, I have functional control over that, so I can, in theory, relatively seamlessly transition from a full track to the jam components of things. I'm still working on the actual efficacy of that, because it's also about getting it to not sound like it's two very different things, but we'll see. You guys are going to be along for part of this journey anyway, so we'll see what happens. But one of the things that I will probably am considering doing is having this somewhere else that's not as accessible, and just maybe having the ability to call it up as a key command or something like that. But I can basically lock this pattern, or this clip to my launch control. So whenever I enter that particular sequencer, it only stays locked to that particular pattern, or that particular clip. So I don't even have to actually look at it in live anymore, because I can always just go back to it on using my controller. So what I'm thinking, that might be the best way to go for me for this particular situation, since it'll be it'll also free up an extra channel, which in this concept I would need, because I do want to be able to access this channel right here. The looper I've got set up already to where it can be, I've got something on my Fader Fox where I just press a button and I'll call that one up real easy. So it doesn't have to be in my group of 8 for the rest of the Fader Fox mapping, or the way that the Fader Fox is set up on a control surface. So this is in a nutshell how I would like to perform. I do like having this ability to play full songs whenever I want to, especially if like jamming is, let's say people aren't necessarily feeling it, or I'm not necessarily going in the right direction, or heaven forbid shit's not really working very well. Then I have this to fall back on, and also to really help drive the concept of the performance too. So it'll feel like you get the best of both worlds. There's the safety in what you've composed, and you don't discount the hard work that's gone into creating these compositions, because these are going to be way more polished than these things are going to be by a long shot, for sure, undoubtedly. But the spontaneity and the variety and the ability to people see that you're doing something that actually really is affecting things, that helps for the concept of a performance. Because I'm thinking of this from a performance aspect, not just as showcasing my musical talent, but I'm trying to also put on a little bit of a show. So this has been a little exposition on the live performance concept that I've been working on. I'm certain that people are probably going to have a lot of questions and are going to be interested to see what happens when I show the controller aspects of things. I got to rig up a camera and all that stuff first to do that. And then I'll be happy to demonstrate how it should hopefully work. Hopefully so. I mean, I'm still having my own problems. I really wish I had a faster computer to be able to really do this properly. Then I could add in a lot more stuff, a lot more variety, a lot more spontaneity to a certain degree, more sense, and all that. But thanks for checking this out, and I hope some of this might inspire you to see what else you can do to improve your performance capacity. And even if you don't want to, if you just think I'm nuts, that's cool. I am a little nuts, but this is also fun for me. So we'll see. Take it easy. Peace.